Made it to the Lair. Thank you so much for joining me, because tonight we're going to have a conversation about something I think everybody needs to get involved in. I'm joined tonight by somebody that's, I think you're going to appreciate what he's got to say, because he's coming at it from an on-the-streets level perspective of being interactive with the youth, because that's our topic tonight. We're going to be discussing youth in this conversation inside of the Lair. I'm Akiba Howard, and I'd like to introduce you to a gentleman who I believe is going to actually, as we move forward, not only through this conversation, but as we move into the future, is going to be very instrumental, even in a micro way, of making differences in the lives of children. I've actually been lucky enough to see and hear and read, if I will, from his Facebook page, the kind of impact that he made. So let me go ahead and introduce you to Joel Julien. Joel, thank you so much for joining us inside the Lair tonight. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do?
Hey, Akiba. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate that. What a great opportunity to speak to the world and to you about issues in education and issues with our youth in urban and even rural environments where a lot of our kids are just experiencing dynamic challenges. A little bit about me. I'm a longtime educator, come from a family of educators. I have served as a teacher and a principal, district level administrator. I've done it all pretty much in education. I was originally part of Teach for America, and at the present time, working through a host of agencies to try to better the lives of young people through a program we call the Learned Academy. And so that's basically about it.
You know, see, that's the kind of thing, and this is why I wanted to have a conversation with you, because you're doing things that I think we've got to find ways to scale up. You know, there's a whole lot going on, and you know what? Hold on a second. Let me talk about what we're going to be talking about today, because we could jump right into the conversation, but I want to make sure that everybody who's tuned in understands we're dealing with some very important issues tonight. We're always going to deal with important issues on the Lair, but tonight especially, because I think as we look around and we see all of the news cycles that have been going on, we're seeing all of these amazing experiences, both with youth doing magnificently positive things, but also the other side of the spectrum with them doing some sad things. And so we're going to talk about the state of the youth as I see it, and I think more importantly as Joel sees it through the eyes of someone who is an educator. And then I really want to touch on this idea of looking in the mirror. I don't, there's something to be said about what our responsibility is as the 40-somethings, as the 50-somethings, and how we got here. Because I think not only do our parents possibly have a little bit of responsibility to take, but we definitely have some to take. And as we move forward, I wonder, because we like to call on other communities to take responsibility for their actions if they're egregious against us. And I think we need to do the same thing, but we'll talk about that. And also, what is next? Some real solutions about how we can attack these issues. Both from an aggressive and a passive perspective. And you and I talked a few days ago about this idea of taking the micro to the macro.
That's right. I would say, just kind of quoting Malcolm X, formerly known as Malcolm Little, he said that education is the passport to the future. And I think that although this could be defined as a battle, right? A battle to improve the lives of young people, that the tools and the weaponry that needs to be used is not in the form of a tank or a gun or a grenade, rather in the form of a book, and with some very serious conversations about what it means to be educated and how that can be applicable in your world as an adult or even as a youth. And so I think that's where kind of the conversation needs to begin if we're going to talk about change.
Right,
It's
right.
centered around education. It's all centered around the knowledge of self and awareness of issues both near and far, issues in the United States and outside of the United States.
Well, we are a global community now. I mean, that, at the end of the day, we can't look for just solutions that are here. We have to look for solutions that can apply themselves everywhere. And it's so interesting because in so many other arenas, when you talk about health, we don't talk about health on just a local level, although obviously we have to deal with it on a local level. But we talk about health issues on a global scale. And so,
if I may, speaking to that, there's an individual in Oakland who has done some phenomenal work. His name is Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade, who has, and he's well known in educational circles.
Right.
He's done a lot of work around health, and since you bring that up, health consequences and the education of young people. That there's an overlap, there's a tie-in between things that kids are experiencing physiologically,
right,
and their academic outcomes.
Right, right.
So, as one example, many of our young people, they attend school in areas or in neighborhoods where they're experiencing a high level of trauma. Trauma along the lines of what you would see out of a soldier coming back from Iraq or Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And this is what the data and the statistics are telling us. And so if you have a child who is experiencing that trauma for whatever reason, and they're in your classroom or they're in your school, what mechanisms and what resources are there to support that child who's experiencing those things? And what we often find is that there simply aren't a lot of resources.
Right.
And in many cases, there's not only not a lot of resources, but there's not a whole lot of will or a lot of know-how on the part of the educators in the system to try and make the change that so many of them want to make.
Well, there you have it. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, you're locked into the Lair. We'll be right back because we got to get this show on the road and we got to get things moving. We want to find some solutions, and I think we're going to do that tonight. Thank you, Joel, for staying with us. We'll be right back. Well, we're back. Thank you for sticking inside the Lair with us. I got Joel Julien in the house with me tonight, and we're having a conversation about youth. Before the break, we were talking about some of the solutions, and also you touched on something that I really think we should, as you were saying, we need to start at certain places. The health effects of what children have to deal with, both in their communities, but then when they take that baggage to school with them, that has a significant effect on whether or not the educational process is even working for them, doesn't it?
Right, absolutely. If I'm hungry or I've experienced something along the lines of maybe witnessing a murder, or it could have been loud music in my ear all night. It's going to be pretty hard for me to come in and bear down and focus.
Right.
And so I think that when we talk about designing schools, we talk about designing classrooms and curriculum. I think the best models out there demonstrate how they can incorporate that in some way, or they can address that in some way. And I really think that that's where it is.
But wait, now let's take a step back. I don't remember all of this. I mean, seriously, right? Montera, King, Castlemont, Skyline. When we were in school in the 80s.
Rodale.
I'm sorry. I was working my way towards there, right? Wasn't I working? I was working my way back up there. What happened? Seriously. I mean, I'm looking at this experience and I'm thinking to myself, when we were in school, the whole experiential element of education was different. And that seems to be the case from top to bottom, whether it's administrators, whether it's I have a friend here in Sacramento who works in truancy, and she actually gets out in the streets and goes and talks to these parents. And it seems like the mindset of the parent, the student, the teacher, so much has changed. What happened?
Well, I would venture to say that a lot of what we're seeing is there's a generation gap.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And for the moment, I'd like to just kind of focus in on maybe the African American community, let's say,
please,
where we know clearly there's a crisis in not only the community, many of our communities, and also in the schools. And what I would say there is just taking Oakland, for example. Many of the folks who are here were transplanted here from regions in the South,
right,
or back east, where historically there has been, as we know from the history books, discrimination, Jim Crow, racism that you and I never faced in that way.
Right.
When you have a parent who is well-to-do now, who made something of themselves, got themselves educated, but came from an environment where maybe they grew up on a plantation. And when I say plantation, I seriously mean that.
Right.
In a sharecropping type of situation where the motivation was to get out and get away from that type of treatment and to find opportunity elsewhere, and found themselves out west where they passed that tradition on, which is the priority that I have for myself and my family is to make sure that, number one, I'm working and I'm productive, and that I can educate my children, and that they're getting the best education possible.
Certainly.
I think the civil rights movement brought a lot of that about, so that our parents, your parents, my parents, many of the parents of folks in our generation were of that mindset. Well, now how far are we removed from the civil rights movement?
Right.
At least, 30, 40 years away. And so as time has gone on, I think that we've become relaxed in our generation about the purpose behind what a lot of our forefathers, as it were, and foremothers, what they have done to help us to succeed.
Yeah, and you're taking us to a conversation we're going to have later on today, because this idea of our responsibility, I think, is crucial. But let me take us back around the corner again, because the health issue is something. I mean, when you talk about being hungry, you talk about the traumas that young folks are seeing in their neighborhoods. And I mean, I grew up in the town, but I grew up on the hill, as you know. And so, we were removed from it, but we still experienced bits and pieces of it here and there. And I still got to say, it seems like something is so significantly different with respect to just the elements of what folks, I mean, everybody that was at Montero didn't have a whole bunch of money. That's not to say that everybody, there were individuals there that fell within the middle to low income strata.
Okay.
And it doesn't seem like they were going through the kind of stuff that the kids that are in those middle to low and lower poverty strata are going through today. Is it just me? Am I looking at it crazy, or I mean, what's going on?
I wish I could say I had all the answers to that.
Let me tell you a quick story. that has brought me to this emotion.
Yeah.
I have a friend who teaches in Pennsylvania. Teaches fifth graders. These are 12-year-olds.
Okay. I love the fifth graders too, by the way.
And you'll appreciate this then. You'll appreciate why this is such a scary and painful story. A few weeks ago, she tells me a story about one of the boys in her class that has his iPad and gets caught downloading porn. Because he's brought in his cell phone and is using that as a hotspot, because obviously at the school they have the proxy blocked so that he can't get to the XXX sites. But he brings in his own, device, gets his own hotspot going, and next thing you know, he is surfing some stuff.
Fully active over there.
Right. Now, here's the thing. Today, I hear this story of a 12-year-old girl who comes into her office this morning bawling. And this is going to sound real familiar because we've seen this now in the news about 3 times in the last month or so. Comes into her office bawling and says, "I'm so sorry, Miss ... I hope you don't hate me for this, but a couple of the boys apparently are sharing a picture that I sent to this other little boy, and it's of me naked on my bed, and I don't know what to do about it." Now, I could go into some more of the details of the story. It's really not necessary, but you know where I'm going with this. It's this idea that we in 86, 85, 84 were exposed to a certain element of stuff. But I'll be honest with you, my first experience with pornography was probably in, I'd say maybe 6th or 7th grade. But check this out. It was a friend of ours that had found one of his father's 8mm rolls of film, right? And so we all snuck into the house while he was at work and set it up and had lookouts at the door, and everybody was nervous. Wow. And I don't even really remember what I saw. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That was the best I could do. And I certainly didn't have a cell phone, Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook in order to spread any kind of personal nastiness.
Right.
Today, these youngsters are seeing and experiencing things that are having direct effects, again, on their education. Because, as I said to her, I think it's time for us to rethink this idea of children needing cell phones so bad. I want to know how many children have been saved, and I know Columbine will be issued up as an example, but how many children have really been saved in school shooting situations where they had these cell phones? How many children have been saved from kidnappings because they had these cell phones? I know there are some, but are there enough for us to justify leaving these kinds of things within that framework of that educational process? Because it seems to me like we're turning a left corner here.
That's interesting that you say that and you bring that to bear here. And it's funny because I was walking with a mutual friend of ours just yesterday. We went on a little hike, and we were just talking about our own children and their interfacing with technology, more specifically with smartphones and that sort of thing. And how we have to restrict their use, and we have to monitor their use, and we have to, and we laughed and we joked because we said, how do we do the things that we did, like back in the day, without a cell phone? And we did it, I mean, if our parents said to us, we're going to come pick you, there was no cell phone involved. It was, you need to be at that location. 10 minutes before I'm there, and you just need to wait, And it's a trip because, the cell phone is yet another thing that demonstrates how we're living in a different world. We're living in a different time. And I can only imagine what it must be like to be a child or a teen or an adolescent living in a situation where you have stimulus coming at you constantly. Okay? What kind of stimulus is it? So, we talked about the health consequences, and now I think we can also kind of hitch that wagon with other things that we're internalizing, right? So we're internalizing media, we're internalizing food, different types of food, fast food, whatever it is, it's affecting, who and what we are and what we can be. And a lot of this has to be centered around not Joel and Mr. Julien coming up with all the answers, because I'll tell you, as far as the technology goes, as a school administrator, where oftentimes I was having to dish out discipline because that's part of the process. I would say at least 30% of my time is dealing with cell phones, iPads, YouTube, Facebook posts, parents coming in and demanding that, that cell phone be turned back over to them. Kids recording fights and this sort of thing. And so, as I said, it's really a different world, and I think that I don't have the answer to that. I think I would have to develop some inquiry for you and for others and say, where are you at with this? What do you think about this? What are some solutions? I mean, if most of the time in school is being spent non-productively using electronic devices, and we're not getting down to the bare bones, reading, writing, and mathematics, then how is our time being used?
Thank you for making it back to the Lair. I do appreciate you guys spending some time with Joel and I, and we're talking tonight about youth. I mean, this is a conversation that has to begin and has to, I think, mature and really has to get some legs, because if we don't start to look at this problem, I mean, we're talking about our future. And I oftentimes don't think enough people, and certainly enough parents, kind of like you were describing a minute ago, these parents that come in and demand their kids get their cell phones back.
I want that cell phone. Give me that cell phone.
Yeah, listen, I mean, I can't tell you how shocked and dismayed I am. And this leads me to this issue that we were talking about before the break, and it's eternal optimism. Joel, listen, I'm going to be straightforward with you. I am not as optimistic as you educators are. I look around and I see, like, my son is 20, he'll be 21 here in just a few days.
Right on.
Yes, God bless. And but I look around at his friends, and of his friends, he may be 1 out of 10 who are doing anything, and who are motivated to do anything, and who even look like there's a prospect for doing anything. So many of these folks in that age group. Now, the contrast, of course, is that obviously, as I say, my son is putting in some work. My daughter is doing phenomenal at Chico State as a volunteer, as an activist, as an educated student. She's doing great things. And in her group, I see a lot of young people who are doing good things. But as I have a conversation with my father a lot, I say to him, if the day comes where we all have to stand in line to get some food, I'm smart enough to know I got to go stand in that line. But I worry about some of these youngsters who will sit on the corner waiting for somebody to show up with their tray. So I don't have that same optimism that I know you and some of the other educators that I know of have. And I wonder, is eternal optimism should it be part of the solution, or should we be looking at this maybe with slightly less rose-colored glasses?
Let me work on that a little bit for you, my brother, and say, as a man, as I was saying in the last segment, as an African American man, as a black man here in America, who has had the good fortune to be educated by family and educational institutions in this country, I have been a student of history.
Okay.
And as a student of history, I have witnessed, I have seen with my own eyes and read and heard stories about folks that came long before me. And I'm not trying to get into the pulpit here and that whole thing, but it's informative for us to discuss our ancestors. Going back to traveling on a slave ship to arrive at this destination. Right. Through hundreds of years of chattel slavery, through Reconstruction and Jim Crow, and the things that they went through, and the things that they experienced, the only way that I could possibly explain my existence here right now is because of that eternal optimism.
Okay.
So the eternal optimism, as you so eloquently stated it, is essential. It is the critical piece. It is
Mm-hmm.
the basic, bare bones foundation of
Mm-hmm.
struggle and of achievement and of transformation, quite
Mm-hmm.
frankly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, if we don't have optimism, if we don't have hope, or as Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade puts it, he says, we're not talking hokey hope.
Oh, okay. All right.
We're talking real hope,
Mm-hmm.
hope that leads to change.
Right. Right.
And so that's a good starting place for all of us, and in developing that hope, or in maintaining and sustaining that eternal hope that our ancestors had,
Right. Right.
that grandparents and great grandparents had, that drove us to this place.
Oh yeah. From Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, you name
Georgia,
it.
Alabama, Washington
Right.
D.C., New
Right.
York. We can
Right.
go on.
Yeah.
We in order to really sustain that, we have to also begin with the positive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we have a tendency, because of the media, right? Because the media plays a big
Oh
role
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
in how we come to understand what's going on in our world.
Yeah.
Um, but when we kind of set that to the side and we really look at what's happening, we can see that actually youth are doing some very positive things. That actually, if we look at the statistics and the data, that in many ways, absolutely, celebrating America's youth. There it is right there.
And I do want to point out, in case anybody wants to get this is located at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Basically, it's a report on what's going on with America's youth today. And I'm going to tell you what, Joel, I stopped and I took some time out to read through this. And I thought to myself, what you just said, the reason why I cut you down there is because what you just said is significant. You read through this report, and I'm going to have a link on my website to this report so that everybody who wants to take a look at it can. What you're going to find in this is eternal optimism times 10.
Yeah.
These are beautiful numbers. Now, I'm going to tell you what, though.
Well, before you go to that, let me just read a quick excerpt from it.
Go ahead.
Just real quick. It says, the youth of America, the facts are positive, it says. They are participating in community, volunteer, civic, religious, and extracurricular activities.
Right.
They are succeeding academically. They are forming positive relationships with parents and family. And they are choosing healthy behaviors. And I really believe that that's a lot of what we see if we look more in depth at our youth and what they're doing.
So let me ask you this then. Because in the Cal Grant Cash for College report, it states educational attainment is not evenly distributed amongst ethnic groups in California, which obviously we know. 50% of whites and 58.6% of Asians aged 25 to 64 attained an associate degree or higher by 2005, compared to 14.9% of Latinos, 33.7% of African Americans, and it goes on. So, I'm asking this. This is the dichotomy, I think, that is partially, in part, it's created by the media. In part, it's created by factual numbers. But this is what brings me to this issue of how do we tip that scale from numbers like this that we read in Cal Grant's numbers and shake them out with these numbers that we read from the Department of Health and Human Services and find a way to actually engage people in thinking the glass is half full rather than half empty?
That's the age-old question. And I wish that I could list off, a host of solutions.
Right.
I know that the work that we do, I know that we make change in the small micro, and I know that there are educators and parents and other youth and community organizations and religious organizations, all sorts of organizations, that are making changes, incremental changes.
Certainly.
But what we want to see is that whole scale change, and I just really think that there needs to be a real conversation in our communities and in our country about what is the vision for our future. And with so much emphasis being placed on standardized, high stakes testing, the question is, are we ever going to get to that conversation? Or are we just going to keep teaching kids how to pass a test? Which in the end really does not plug them into much of anything.
You raise an interesting question because, I mean, I've got some statistics here about the entrance or the exit exam, you know,
right.
And I know you've got to have an opinion on that. And I mean, this goes to the idea of accountability, and we're kind of turning a corner on this conversation.
Right.
And I wanted to make sure that we hit on a bunch of topics because the idea is I want to pick your brain and figure out what kinds of things educators are thinking. But, you know, let's turn that corner for a split second and see if, you know, there's not a sense of accountability. I mean, I said we were going to talk about this idea of looking in the mirror. Before we look at ourselves in the mirror, tell me about looking at educators and putting them in the place of accountability so that things change. Because, I mean, I quite frankly am not a fan of the exit exam, but I'm also not a fan of what seems to be the declination of a real sense of standard in school. When my son brought home an essay, right, that had that abbreviated text messaging language in it,
right,
and he got a passing grade for that, I was livid.
Yeah.
Livid. So the standard decreases, yet I'm supposed to maintain my level of optimism. Who do we look to for that? Do we look to the educators? Do we look to the administrators? What do we do about that?
I think that a wide net, and I will speak from my own experience and speak to my own opinion on it a little bit here. I would say that, you know, I think that there needs to be a real wide net that's cast. Okay. So using some of our fishing language here, right? We're casting a wide net to try and encompass a lot of the challenges in this situation and drive home some solutions. I don't think it's one particular thing.
Okay.
I think that, you know, in our country, we have to look at government. We have to look at the communities, the organizations that thrive in the communities. We have to look at the families. Yeah. We have to look at what the priority is for us as citizens living in this nation.
Well, we don't seem to be doing too great a job of that. I mean, when legislation comes up that allows us to adjust educational spending, we as a people in this country, for the most part, don't seem to support those things.
Yeah, I mean, the facts are, I'm looking at one fact here right now, that $31,358 is spent per prisoner. Not per pupil.
Right.
Per prisoner.
And what's that pupil number?
That pupil number comes in at a real low, staggering $8,301, and probably what I would say here, 57 cents. Yeah. So,
I know folks are going to get irritated with me for saying this, and listen, George and Gavin, I personally apologize to you in a very tongue-in-cheek kind of way, but here in Sacramento, we're fighting to keep the Kings, right? We're trying to spend $550. We're chasing Seattle to spend $550. It'll probably bump itself up to $575 million. Now, as an educator, let me ask you this question. If you could raise that kind of money to help the school district, how powerful could that be?
That would be outstanding. But see, with this conversation, now you added sports into the equation. And then you're going to have me talking about my Raiders and my A's.
Look. My point was simply that it's about this community involvement because, I mean, at the end of the day, we just watched the legislative cycle go by where there were plenty of education opportunities to expand spending in different state and federal budgets. We didn't see any of that money increase. So,
let's keep it real. Then let's ask the critical question here: do our legislators, or I put it even another way, does the dominant class in America, and I'll leave it to you to define who the dominant class is. Do they want to see wholesale change for everyone across the board?
See, and that's
American young people, immigrants,
right,
poor white folk,
right.
people not considered to be a part of the middle class or in the mainstream? Do we want to see those people succeed? And if we look at other countries in the world where they have tried to equalize the status of your average citizen,
right?
You see their economies thriving. You see them reaching to new heights and discovering new ways of being for their nation. And while there are, I mean, there is no country on this earth like the United States of America. There's no question about that. True. You're not going to hear me say we are the greatest nation on earth, because that would not be telling the tale. I don't know that there is such a thing as the greatest nation on earth. But there is the one thing this country has going for it is it has expansive opportunity for us to do amazing things with our youth.
Right.
We come together and we have the will to make it happen.
Say it again. It's the will, because that's what, and you know what? Listen, that there is no better note to close this segment on. You guys are tuned into the Lair. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. We're going to be back for a pretty powerful closing segment, because we're going to talk about not only solutions, but we're also going to talk about our personal responsibility, because that's something that I said out of the gate of the show I wanted to discuss, because I really think there's some decisions that we've made over the last decade or so that have affected where we stand now. So we'll be right back. Thank you for joining us. You're inside the Lair. Well, welcome back, everybody. You're inside of the Lair. We've been spending a good deal of time in this hour talking with Joel Julien about the youth. And admittedly, we've strayed off topic here and there, but it's always been tangential to this idea of how we create some solutions. And at the end of the day, as the opening says, these are conversations meant to enlighten, inspire, educate, and to get another conversation started. And I think part of that conversation that needs to get started, Joel, is looking in the mirror. And I want to preface that with this premise.
No.
I want to preface that with this premise that my mother and my father specifically used to say to me all the time, "There's no handbook. Ain't no handbook in raising a child." So we're kind of all going by the seat of our pants and trying to figure it out as we go. And admittedly, while there are no handbooks, there were some standards, some traditional standards that worked really well. There were obviously some elements that didn't work so great, and those things needed to be eliminated. But for the most part, there were some standards that worked out really, really well, and I think the absence of some of those has created a situation that we're in now, where there's a level of disrespect that is through the roof, where there's a level of disregard, apathy, where there's all of these things, it seems, are almost being genetically enhanced in these younger generations because of some choices that we have made. And I think a lot of them include things like music choices and the things that we have accepted as great music in our society. I know when my kids were, when I worked in radio, and one of the reasons I left radio was because of the song, The Thong Song. Wow. First time I heard my daughter singing that in my car, I realized something was wrong and I needed to do something about that. Now, that was just my personal choice, right?
Right.
But as an adult, as a parent, I thought to myself, I don't want to hear my daughter running around singing about a thong up her ass. And so,
True that.
You see what I'm saying? So that was my personal choice. But then things have simply gotten worse. And I see these little girls on YouTube now getting their asses whooped for twerking. And this story I just told you earlier about the 12-year-old in 5th grade who is sending pictures from her cell phone to her quote-unquote little boyfriend of her naked on the bed. we are in a different era, but I mean, don't we need to look in the mirror? Because listen, I was adamant about my children not having a cell phone until such time I felt they were responsible enough to have the damn thing.
Yeah, and that is also how I kind of get down with my own children now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I have a daughter who is about to graduate from high school, and she
God
carries
bless.
on with a smartphone, and she does so responsibly. But I also have a younger child who's an adolescent who doesn't have any of those.
Right.
And,
Right.
and that's because I don't believe that she's ready at this point.
Right.
And so, speaking of personal responsibility, um, that's huge. I mean, that is where it all starts. Let me say something quickly about cell phones as it relates to this personal responsibility issue and parenting. Let's say
Mm-hmm.
I have a certain viewpoint on the use of, let's say, a smartphone in my home, and I have certain standards and boundaries that I've established for my children
Right.
as it relates to their use of it. But I don't live down the street or up the hill or around the corner. I live here.
Right.
And that person that lives down the street, they actually may have a whole different set of circumstances that smartphone actually, in some cases, becomes a lifesaver.
True.
If I am, for example, a single parent, and that's the only way that I can communicate with my child, and I know that my child has to ride on the A train all the way across town,
Right.
Harlem back to Brooklyn,
Yeah.
then that cell phone becomes more than just entertainment.
Absolutely.
And so I think that, once again, casting that wide net and trying to understand holistically, what's really going on. But I think personal responsibility is where it's at. And I think in our culture in general, in almost every community, across racial lines, across economic lines, I think we have lost that. I think that that there's a very me-centeredness, a very vitriolic kind of, somebody's gonna come and make things happen for me, and I don't need to work for it, and I was never taught that. I was never, and as a teacher, as my students will clearly tell you, I'm holding you accountable.
Right.
Well,
Doctor, we have here in America, this is something that's always intrigued me. I saw this special on PBS a few years back, a couple years ago. In South Korea, in elementary school, they teach these children how to use the internet. Let me repeat that. They have a class they have to go to as a part of their standard curriculum, Joel.
Okay.
Just like math, English, or whatever else. It is about internet usage. So in elementary school, they're teaching their children how to responsibly use these tools. You talk about how you as a parent affect rules in your house that are, and then when you talk about that child that's got to ride the A train from Harlem to Brooklyn, I find that the children that are in those situations tend to be those responsible children that actually use the phone for what it's for. The ones that don't have to ride that train from Harlem to Brooklyn, only have to walk around the corner, whose mothers got them the fur-lined coat last Christmas and got them another one for their birthday in February, and they have the smartphone as well, and the new kicks because the new Jordans just came out. Those are the ones that tend not to be as responsible because they keep on getting these things that aren't necessary for their life. Because what you described is a phone that's necessary for the life process, right?
Yeah, but I would say this. I would qualify that, and I would say that as an educator, it's very important to kind of take people where they come or as they are.
Okay.
And by that I mean the circumstances that folks are dealing with, that they're faced with, we don't often know.
Right.
If we're looking at those new kicks as you described, we don't often know how that child came about acquiring those kicks.
True.
And it leads me kind of back to where you were talking about standards, because and I said to you earlier, I was really holding my students accountable, hold my children accountable. But what was always important was that there was a sense of ownership on the part of the group or the students or the families that we're working with in the process of developing the standard.
Okay. All right.
Because, if I join the military and I'm a private in the military, they're going to teach me a set of standards.
Right, exactly.
They're going to hold me accountable.
Right, right.
And the thing is that I didn't create any of those standards. Those standards have been around. They've been passed down from battalion to battalion for hundreds of years.
Right.
I'm not going to come in there and change any of their standards. Yeah. I have to follow their standards, and if I don't, then I'm out. Schools operate in the same way, and there are some households that operate in the same way. And while you can achieve the outcome that maybe you're trying to achieve by having your children do the things that you want or expect them to do, if they're not a part of the process, if they're not a part of creating the standard and upholding and taking ownership over the standard, then that full transformation has a difficult time taking hold.
Sure, and I see that, absolutely. I mean, that makes perfect sense in the idea that when I think, and this is funny because for me, I wrote a book called The Stop Mechanism. And in that book, I talk about this idea that there are certain of us that simply know how to succeed because it's ingrained. It's something that you just do. Others get stopped by all of these different small little things. The child comes in and asks you for something you don't have and it frustrates you and your day is shot to hell. Or as described in The Secret, you stub your toe on the corner of the bed in the morning and you reverberate that through the rest of your day and your energy is gone.
Yeah.
I
can I just say for a minute, this is off topic.
Yeah.
That stubbing your toe really hurts. And, how when you stub your toe and then it takes 5 minutes for it to catch up to your brain, and you're like, I know it's coming. Yeah. You know what I mean? That sucks.
Now that's an interesting premise there, and I'm just gonna follow that line for a second because it's that very 5 minutes of the toe connecting to the brain.
Yeah.
That if we would think ahead, we would use that time to take some deep breaths because we know what's coming.
Exactly.
We know what's coming. Take some deep breaths. Prepare yourself. Right? So let me tie that back into this conversation. It's this idea of we can see what's happening. We can see what's coming down the road.
Right.
We know that if we don't make any changes to what is in front of us, let me just toss out a couple quick statistics.
Sure.
Child poverty in California, the number of poor children and percentage of poor, 1,846,000, that's 19.9%. Number of children living in extreme poverty, 7.9%, 729,817 people. Listen.
Wow.
Listen, and that's just the beginning. I mean, I could go on and on and on. The number of children without health insurance, 11.2%. Number of children enrolled in the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP program, 1,700,000, right? And it goes on and on and on. I got statistics up the wazoo. I sent you a bunch of them. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, for me, what it says is this. And I'm willing to accept your optimism premise, right?
Right on.
Run with me on this, though. If I'm looking at all of these horrific numbers, and I'm looking at the smartphone, iPad, porn in 5th grade experience, and I'm looking at the Facebook and the YouTube and all of this, and I'm saying to myself, I hope we as a community this legislative cycle vote for some educational funding. And I'm looking at all of these things in this huge amalgam of disgust, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can see what's coming, Joel. We can see what's coming. I mean, there is nothing good coming if we continue down this path.
That toe's going to get stumped.
So
that pain is coming.
So if we know the pain is coming, what is it that is precluding us And when I say us, I'm talking about the non-educators, because this is your opportunity now as an educator to speak to us non-educators and say to give me something that allows me to go to take that breath I was talking about, that 5 minutes between the time that I stub my toe and it gets to my brain.
Right.
We're inside of that 5 minute window right now as adults, as parents, as members of this community, as people in this village, right? We're in that 5 minute window because we've got all these numbers around us. We can see the effects that the things are having on our children. And we didn't even touch on the drugs that we keep on giving our children, the Ritalins and all of that.
And if I could, that's what I would equate it to.
Okay.
I would equate it to, we use the stumping the toe, but drug addiction.
Yeah.
Or I would equate it to watching your toddler child run out into the middle of the street.
Yes.
Or you don't have a whole lot of time to really think about what that the impact of that car is going to have disastrous results.
Exactly.
Or continued abuse of this substance is going to have disastrous results. And so you have to intervene. You have to interrupt the process that's unfolding.
Right.
And so we are in a crisis, all the good things and positive things that the youth are doing aside for a moment. We are in a crisis situation.
Okay.
Education especially, which we said at the beginning of the conversation, I think we both agreed, is the key to transforming a lot of the circumstances for the population.
Absolutely.
In this country. Be you white, black, green, brown, polka dot.
Doesn't matter.
Education is the key.
Yes.
But unless we have the will to interject ourselves and intervene, despite the consequences, into this system that has gone awry, nothing is going to change. And that toe stumping, it's going to manifest itself in that brain like something we've never seen.
Yeah.
And so I really believe that when we talk about interjecting ourselves, or we talk about intervening with the system, I think we have to have the will and the commitment to do so. We have to have conversations like this.
Right.
We have to be willing to, as parents, show up at the school sites and connect with the people in the schools who are trying to advocate for the youth and advocate for a better system of education.
Right.
This is what we have to do.
Right.
Because that parent who's buying those kicks and who is not making the best decision about the cell phone with the child, if they know better, they'll do better.
Okay. Now you're raising you're raising an interesting topic, and we're closing in on the end of the show here, so we may have to do a part 2 for this one. But I do want to, and in fact, let's just go ahead and officially schedule a part 2 for this conversation, because one of the things we did not get to talk about, and that is parents. I mean, you and I are parents raised in a certain era, came out of that era with a certain mindset, and we're manifesting that in our children. But then we talk about the teacher I discussed with you earlier, who's got the 12-year-olds that are playing in areas they don't need. And you engage with some of these parents as well.
Seen it all.
And we've got to, I want to know, because I got to be honest with you, I'm a little frustrated by what appears to be apathy. Now, it goes back to your point. We don't know what their circumstance is, so I'm not going to judge. But I do want to have that conversation where we discuss some of the things that you see and experience from the names have been changed in this story, because I need to know what it is that I'm not seeing, that it can be some connective tissue. Because I think, for me, one of the things that becomes an issue with respect to transformative change is the idea that these parents that run up into the school and blame the teachers when their child's been surfing porn in 5th period, something's wrong with that parent. And how do we, because you can't slap them, obviously. We don't want to encourage any kind of violence. You can't shake them. But
we can't?
Yeah. I know back in the day, listen, my father would have shown up and shook a teacher and said, "You did not spank my son. What's wrong with you?" As opposed to, "Give him his phone back. He'd be like, "What's wrong with you? Why didn't you smack him and then call me?"
Right.
We're in a different era, and I get that. But there's something to be said about what the parents are doing. But this leads me to this very simple premise. We've got PTA meetings that happen all the time. We've got resource meetings that happen in community centers all the time. We've got individuals like you in communities, right? And you and I talked a little bit about a guy that you and I both used to listen to coming up through the days, Davey D, over on KMEL. Used to
Yeah.
do that show, Street Soldiers. Loved that show because I thought
Great
it was
brother. Great
extremely
brother.
powerful. Yes, he is. Now, one of the things that I think, let me put it this way. When Street Soldiers first hit the market, it was a small local program.
Yeah.
And it was about what was happening in the different areas of those neighborhoods that KMEL affected. Davey D got big. And he became somebody that was bigger than just San Francisco.
Right.
And so his discussion has become a national discussion, which I love because that shows the power of what a Street Soldiers type program can do. My premise here for the Lair is about starting conversations on a micro level that I hope will inspire individuals to take these conversations into their own groups and have these discussions about these topics so that what we do is we take and we start with one small micro discussion like this one we're having, and maybe one of your friends on your Facebook page pulls this up and watches it and starts a discussion with their friend, or maybe just shares the link so that maybe 15 of their friends might watch it. And so then we have a hub.
Or a critical mass.
And once we get that one critical mass connected, we know that there are other critical masses around this country and this globe. So all we have to do is utilize the technology that's available to us now, like the Facebook and the YouTube and the Ustream and the LinkedIn and the Twitter, to connect those critical masses into a huge mass of transformation.
Right. And I'm with that 100%. I think that is a great element to discuss and kind of look into. I would also say though that, and I had the good fortune to see Davey D in some moderated events the last couple of weeks, and there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk. It's big talk, little talk, all kinds of talk.
Right.
But at the end of the day, there also has to be some action that coincides with talk.
Right.
And more often than not in our community, in our discussions with one another, we do too much talking and we don't do enough acting.
Right.
Because we as far as black folks go as people, we love to talk.
Yeah.
I think we have the gift of gab. Hip hop.
Right.
It's all about talking.
Right.
But unless it's runs tandem with, it's calibrated to.
Yes.
Some energy and action, and that's when you folks hear that word action and they start recoiling all of a sudden. Well,
look, I mean, here, we're going to go long. I just want to let everybody know who's watching. If you were tuned in for a 1 hour program, we're going to go a little bit long because I really want to drill down on this idea. We have to do more. When you talk about there's got to be an action associated there at the end, right? The problem as I see it is that, and correct me if you see something differently, we got too many folks trying to be the chief so that we can't ever get past stage one, right? And the other side of that is folk want to try to be good at things they're not good at. And that's one of the reasons, and let me see if I can't clearly put an exclamation point on what the Lair is all about. I am a broadcaster. I broadcast. I talk on the radio, on television. I work in front and behind the camera. This is what I'm good at. The editing of this program, I did that.
Awesome.
This is the manifestation and executive production of this program and others, I do. This is what I'm good at. Now, what I'm not good at is community activism. What I'm not good at is youth education or resource development. So what I do as a broadcaster, and this is what I think we all as a community need to get straight, do what you're good at. get in where you fit in, right? I'm a broadcaster who comes to find you, who I know knows some answers to some questions.
Okay, so
So
let me put a pin in that,
go ahead.
and let me go ahead and say to you that you are a brilliant broadcaster first and foremost,
Thank you, sir.
and it is absolutely positively critical that I affirm that in you.
Thank you.
As your fellow human, as your brother, right?
Thank you, sir.
As my friend.
Right, right.
I think that, and this especially goes for persons of color, and I'll even extend it and say women, maybe even disabled folks we can throw in there, and there's probably a host of other folks that we can think about who are suffering from some just flat out self-esteem issues.
Yeah.
So we talk about everybody wanting to be a chief, right? Or everybody wanting to be the cook in the kitchen.
Right.
A lot of that is a result of the fact that many of us feel so assaulted in our lives about who we are, or how we look, or what we think, or what we do, or where we live, that we never feel or experience affirmation.
And you know what? You're absolutely right. I think that you've just made a point that I think is very significant. I will say this, and I think this is going to take our conversation around another corner. I'm not, and maybe I need to be softened around the edges by an individual like yourself, because for me, at 45, my position is for the grown folks, you need to get a little over yourself so that we can get some things done. I'm not saying that what you're dealing with is not valid. I'm not trying to take any power away from that which you may suffer from, but I am saying this: at a certain age, it's time to buckle down and figure out how to, and back to the get in where you fit in premise. If you're a good broadcaster, don't try to be a good community activist. Be a good broadcaster and let community activism find you, as I've done with you. You see, I know that it's not my job to get out in the community and be the activist unless the community comes to me and says, we like the way you speak. Could you come and represent us for this? But what I do as a broadcaster is put shows together like this where I can come and find cats like you to educate me about what I don't know. And see, again, this is the thing that worries me about so many of the folks in our community. They want to be the broadcaster. And if you're not a good broadcaster, but you are a good educator, be a good educator and let the broadcaster find you.
Right. And I think that is, you're basically saying stay in your lane.
Yeah.
If you want to, grow or develop in another field or another area, then that, by all means do
Absolutely.
that.
Absolutely.
Be multi-talented, learn to multitask.
Yes.
But for the purposes or the outcome that's trying to be achieved, stay in your lane. And so, and that's important. But that affirmation piece,
it is important.
Going back to that.
Yeah.
There's two parts to that. It's like, while I'm affirming you and I'm saying, okay, you're a brilliant educator, or you're a brilliant scientist, or a brilliant broadcaster, and I'm affirming you in that. I'm also recognizing that greatness in you that can help to build.
Right.
Like bringing the lanes all together, right? To form a highway.
Yes.
Right? A highway.
Yeah.
To greater things.
Because one lane don't do it.
One lane is not going to get you there, and it may get backed up. There may be just too much traffic, and the toll bridge is down the way, and you forgot your money. You know what I mean? So you gotta bring other people on board who you recognize their greatness. There's two twin brothers. Let me mention them for a minute.
Okay.
Ronald and Reginald. And they are the co-principals at Claremont Middle School in Oakland, California.
Okay.
They happen to be my good friends who we graduated from UC Berkeley together. And they're twin brothers. And so they co-principal this middle school.
Wow.
And the one thing that they say about all of their students, no matter where their students are coming from or what zip code they live in, is that they want their students to wake up in the morning and walk to school knowing that they come from greatness.
Yeah.
Because when you know that you come from greatness, You know, again, going back to the earlier part of the conversation about those people who have gone before us and their eternal optimism.
Right.
And you know you come from that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then it's pretty hard to defeat somebody like that.
It is. It is.
You know, and even though I'm an Oakland Raider fan, I'm a diehard.
Hello.
I look across the bay and I see those San Francisco 49ers. And I'm only going to say this about them. I'm not going to go long about
You
them.
do realize this is being recorded, right?
I do. But I'm going to say about those 49ers, I'm going to say about that Coach Harbaugh and what he did with Alex Smith.
Yeah.
He loaded that kid up with self-confidence, with affirmation after affirmation after affirmation, until he had to go with the other quarterback.
Yeah, right. But he did it though, and it worked.
He did, and we hope that, you know, we don't want Kansas City to get. Well, now I'm getting on football. I got a one-track mind sometimes when it comes to football and sports.
We miss it.
But let me just say that. You know, it's that type of thing we need to do for each other so that we don't step on each other's toes and get into each other's lanes. And then the best of us is not being manifest.
Right.
We are all great. We all have brilliance inside of us.
Exactly. And that's exactly my point. I don't mean to stutter, but that's really it, because within each of our brilliance is the ability to make change, to bring about transformation. And this thing that gets me, and this is why I hope that this show and others that are spawned from it create this sensibility of action, that I come to you and I say, listen, you know some things I don't know. I like talking to people who are smarter than me in this area or that area.
Right.
Talk to me. Tell me what I don't know so that I can maybe then tomorrow, if I just happen to be in a random conversation with somebody who asks me something random, I might have a little bit more of an educated answer, or at least a discourse for them, so that we can engage in a new conversation. And that might teach me something. I come back to you and say, Joel, you'll never guess. I ran into this cat at Panera the other day, and he said blah, 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 blah. And the next thing you know, you run back to the Twins with a new idea. And the next thing you know, Claremont kids have a brand new affirmation they're living by. See, That's what I talk about, and we're going to have to bring this to a close because it's been a lot of fun, but it also does have a finite amount of time. But we've talked about the issues that I think are most important here, and it's this idea that there's something we all have to do. We all have to take some steps in order to improve what is a situation we see has positive elements, definitely has positive elements in it, but have some things associated to it that need addressing. When we talk about the healthcare issues for children, when we talk about the hunger of children, when we talk about the will of the people to keep the educational process and funding in place. These are all the kinds of things that I swear, Joel, you know, it starts with one discussion like this, and I believe it grows from here.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me say on top of that, in closing here, that the primary piece is developing that vision.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, the road to heaven starts with knowing what it is. What is heaven? You know, what is nirvana? What is that ultimate peace, or that ultimate community commitment and advocacy that we really want to see happen? Without that in our mind and in our and without us being in tune and locked into that vision, then putting together all the other pieces is going to be that much more difficult.
Absolutely.
And so as we go away from each other here, and as other people enter into the conversation that we're having, my recommendation from an educator's standpoint is to really begin to craft within your own mind, within your own set of circumstances, what vision do you want to see happen for yourself and for your community?
Right.
And what are you willing to do in order to bring that about?
That's the bottom line. Listen, you've been tuned into a conversation on the Lair with Akiba Howard, and we had a guest tonight that shared with us some very valuable information and valuable conversations about where we need to go with our youth today. So I just want to say very much from a sincere, heartfelt place, Joel, thank you very much for taking the time out And we're going to do this again because we got more conversations we have to have. Absolutely.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Been a pleasure. Thank you guys for joining us on the Lair, and make sure you check the website for the next show. We'll see you then.